The crash and the first encounter. Ethan Carter gasped for air as his ship spun wildly through space. Sparks flew from the control panel. Red warning lights flashed all around him. The ship's AI voice repeated the same words over and over. Critical damage. Hull breach. Crash landing in 30 seconds. Ethan grabbed the controls, trying to steady the ship, but it was no use. The engines were failing. His heart pounded as he saw the strange planet below. Dark green land, deep blue rivers, and towering mountains. He clenched his teeth. I won't die today. The ship roared as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Flames covered the hull. The pressure pushed Ethan against his seat, making it hard to breathe. Then, boom! The ship smashed into the ground, metal tearing apart as it skidded across a rocky surface. Everything went black. Captured by the unknown. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. His head throbbed. Smoke filled the air. His ship was destroyed, half buried in dirt and rock. Sparks still flickered from broken wires. He groaned and unbuckled his seatbelt. Was he alive? Yes. But for how long? A strange noise made him freeze. Heavy footsteps. He turned his head slowly. They were not alone. A group of tall figures stood near the wreckage. At first, their shapes were unclear, but as they stepped closer, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They were humanoid but different, taller than any human, at least 7 feet high. Their bodies were strong, covered in dark, armored suits that shimmered under the planet's sun. Sharp, glowing eyes stared at him, cold and unkind. They were all female. Ethan's muscles tensed. These were not human women. Their features were sharp, their skin a shade of deep blue, and their hair, if it was hair, looked like metallic strands woven into their helmets. One of them stepped forward. She was different, larger, stronger, more decorated than the others. Her silver armor had golden markings, and a long weapon rested against her shoulder. She looked down at Ethan like he was a small, weak creature. She said something in a deep, commanding voice. The language was alien, unfamiliar. Ethan raised his hand slowly, showing he wasn't a threat. Hey, let's not do anything crazy, all right? The alien woman narrowed her eyes. Then she turned to one of her soldiers and gave a short command. Before Ethan could react, something heavy slammed into his back. He hit the ground, face first, groaning in pain. Strong hands grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. They forced him up. A cold metal ring snapped around his wrists. Some kind of cuffs. He was a prisoner. Ethan gritted his teeth. He wanted to fight back, but what could he do? He was surrounded, outnumbered, weak compared to these giants. Survival. That was the only thing that mattered now. The leader turned, flicking her hand. The warriors dragged Ethan away from the crash site, their grip like iron. Where were they taking him? A city like no other. Ethan struggled, but it was useless. The aliens marched him through the wilderness. Twisted trees, massive stone cliffs, rivers that glowed with a soft blue light. The air was thick, heavy with an unknown scent. Then, after hours of walking, they arrived. Ethan's eyes widened. A massive city stretched before him, built from black metal and strange blue energy. Towering structures reached for the sky, pulsing with an eerie glow. Bridges, walkways, and flying vehicles moved smoothly above. Thousands of alien warriors patrolled the streets. And one thing stood out. There were no men. Everywhere he looked, only female aliens moved through the city. Some trained in large battle arenas, sparring with energy weapons. Others carried strange, advanced technology. Ethan swallowed hard. What kind of world was this? The warriors pushed him through the streets, the crowd staring at him with disgust, as if he was an insect, something weak and unworthy. Then the gates to the largest palace opened before him. Ethan was forced inside, into a grand hall. The floor was like polished stone, smooth and reflective. Strange symbols glowed on the walls. And at the end of the hall, on a raised throne, sat her, the queen. She was taller than the others, wearing golden armor, a long flowing cape behind her. Her piercing red eyes stared at Ethan with amusement and curiosity. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. Then she spoke. Her voice was deep, powerful, carrying an air of absolute authority. A male. The room fell silent. Ethan's stomach twisted. He could understand her words. But how? The queen tilted her head. A male, from the stars. How? Interesting. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't like the way she said that. The queen slowly stood up. Tell me, little creature, do you have a purpose? Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He was in deep trouble. The harsh reality of the alien world. Ethan Carter sat on the cold, hard floor of his prison cell. His arms were still sore from the heavy restraints the alien warriors had used on him. The metallic cuffs were gone now, but the memory of their crushing grip remained. The cell was dimly lit by a soft blue glow from the walls. Strange symbols pulsed with energy, shifting like living things. The air smelled of metal and something unfamiliar, a scent that made his head feel heavy. His mind raced. Where was he? What did they want from him? Everything about this place was wrong. He had crash-landed on an alien world where men seemed non-existent. Every figure he had seen, every soldier, every leader, every face, was female. And they all looked down on him as if he were something pathetic, something less than them. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't weak. He wasn't useless. But in their eyes, he was nothing. A loud metallic clank echoed through the chamber. He looked up just as the doors slid open. Two tall, armored warriors entered. Their presence alone sent a wave of tension through the air. They moved with precision, their glowing red eyes locked onto him like he was some kind of insect. Between them walked a different figure. She was unlike the others. Her armor was sleek and black, marked with golden engravings. Her presence radiated power, but her expression was not of hatred. It was curiosity. She studied Ethan for a long moment before speaking. Her voice was deep, confident. Stand up. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to follow orders. Not like this. But one of the warriors stepped forward, resting a hand on a holstered weapon at her hip. Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't in a position to fight. He stood, meeting the woman's gaze. She smirked. Good. At least you can follow simple commands. Ethan frowned but didn't reply. She took a slow step forward, circling him like a predator. You are different from the males we have here. Asterisk, 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 you have strength, intelligence, perhaps usefulness. He kept his expression neutral. What did she mean by the males we have here? The woman stopped in front of him, her piercing red eyes locking onto his. I am General Cythera, and you are a problem. Ethan exhaled. Great. The truth about this world. The warriors led Ethan out of the prison chamber. He expected to be thrown into another cell or taken to the queen again, but instead they'd brought him to something far worse. A massive underground facility. The moment the doors opened, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Inside were hundreds of other males, but they were nothing like him. They were frail, weak, and broken. Some sat on the ground with hollow eyes, their bodies thin and malnourished. Others worked in silence, their movements slow, their faces void of hope. They weren't warriors. They weren't even treated as people. Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell is this place? Cythera watched him carefully. This is what happens to males on our world. They serve. They obey. They are nothing more than tools. Ethan felt his pulse pounding in his ears. This isn't right. This is slavery. Cythera continued, her voice almost amused. Your kind is weak. You have no purpose beyond what we give you. That is why your arrival here is confusing. She turned to him. You should be like them. Helpless. Afraid. But you are different. Ethan took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. He had to be careful here. The other males glanced at him, their faces unreadable. Some looked curious. Others looked angry, as if his presence was a threat to them. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't going to end up like them. He wouldn't let that happen. Cythera watched him, then smirked. "Let's test that strength of yours." Thrown into the arena, Ethan was dragged through the alien fortress until they reached a large circular chamber. It wasn't just a room. It was an arena. High above, hundreds of female warriors gathered, their eyes locked onto the center of the pit. Some leaned forward in excitement. Others whispered among themselves. A warrior stood on the edge of the balcony, raising a glowing spear. She called out in the alien language, and a crowd erupted into cheers. Ethan's stomach dropped. This was a test, a fight. He was shoved into the center. The gates behind him slammed shut. Then, from the opposite side, a massive door rumbled open. Ethan took a slow step back. Something was coming. The ground shook as a monstrous alien beast stepped forward. It was twice the size of a lion, covered in thick, armored plates. Its long tail whipped behind it, ending in a sharp, serrated blade. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, locked onto Ethan like he was prey. The crowd roared. Ethan inhaled sharply. No weapons, no armor, just his fists. He glanced up. Cythera watched from above, arms crossed. This wasn't a test. This was an execution. The beast let out a deafening roar and charge. Ethan had seconds to react. The fight for respect. The beast charged, its massive claws digging into the arena floor, kicking up dust. Ethan had no time to think, only react. He threw himself to the side just as the creature's tail whipped through the air, slicing the ground where he had stood a second ago. The crowd erupted into laughter and jeers. They didn't expect him to last long. Ethan scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. His mind raced. No weapons, no armor, just his instincts. The beast turned, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto him again. It let out a thunderous roar and lunged. Ethan moved, dodging at the last second. Too slow. The beast's claws grazed his shoulder, tearing his sleeve, and leaving a burning pain. He staggered back, breathing hard. The alien warriors above were shouting in their language, laughing, mocking him. Ethan gritted his teeth. They thought he was weak. They thought he was nothing. He wouldn't die like this. Adapting like a human, Ethan kept moving, dodging the beast's attacks. The creature was strong, powerful, but it had a pattern. It always lunged the same way, always led with its right claw, always followed with its tail. He wasn't just running anymore. He was studying it, learning, adapting. The next time the beast lunged, Ethan ducked, not backward, but forward, diving under its attack. The creature stumbled, caught off guard. The crowd's laughter stopped. Ethan rolled to his feet, eyes locked on the beast. For the first time, he saw something else in its glowing eyes. Surprise. It hadn't expected him to fight back. Ethan's confidence grew. Humans were weaker than many creatures, but they were smart. They adapted. They survived. And he was about to prove it. Turning the tide. The beast snarled and lunged again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He dodged, then pivoted on his heel, using the beast's own momentum against it. His fist slammed into the side of its head, right where the armor was thinner. The impact was solid. The beast stumbled, shaking its head. The crowd gasped. Ethan's muscles burned, but he couldn't stop now. He kept moving, dodging, and striking, targeting the weak points. The beast's eyes, its joints, the soft flesh under its jaw. With each hit, the creature grew slower. The alien warriors watching from above were no longer laughing. They leaned forward, eyes wide. Ethan smirked. They weren't expecting this, were they? The beast snarled, furious. It lunged one last time, claws outstretched. Ethan sidestepped, then grabbed its tail as it passed. Using all his strength, He yanked it sideways. The beast collapsed onto its side, kicking up dust. The crowd fell silent. Ethan stumbled back, breathing hard, his body aching. He had won. The beast lay still, whimpering in pain, unable to rise. Ethan turned, looking up at General Sithara, who had been watching from above. She was no longer smirking. For the first time, her eyes held something different. Not amusement, not disgust. Respect. A new fate. The gates to the arena opened, and the warriors entered, surrounding Ethan. For a moment, he thought they would kill him anyway. But instead they bowed their heads slightly, just for a second. It wasn't much, but in this world, it meant everything. General Sithara descended from her throne and stood before him. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice unreadable. "You are something else." Ethan exhaled. "Damn right." Sithara turned to the queen's throne above. The queen, watching everything with an unreadable expression, finally stood. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "He is no longer a prisoner." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. She stepped forward, her piercing red eyes locked onto him. "He will be tested. If he is strong, he will live. If he is weak, he will die." Ethan stiffened. He wasn't free yet. The queen continued, "Prepare him for training." Sithara nodded and turned to Ethan. "You are coming with me." Ethan sighed in relief, but also felt a chill run down his spine. He had survived the fight, but this was just the beginning. What kind of training did they have in mind? Secrets of the alien world. Ethan Carter stood in the center of the alien training ground, breathing heavily. The humid air clung to his skin, thick with the scent of metal and sweat. Around him, towering female warriors moved with precision, practicing deadly combat techniques with weapons he had never seen before. He was no longer in a prison cell, no longer a helpless prisoner, but he was far from free. General Sithara had made that clear. You survived the beast. That does not make you strong. It makes you lucky. Now, Ethan was to undergo training, but it felt more like a slow execution. The warriors were merciless, treating him like an unworthy creature. Every test they threw at him was meant to break him, and yet he endured. Because deep down, Ethan knew one thing. If he failed, he would die. The training begins. Ethan had always been quick on his feet, but here he was surrounded by giants. The alien warriors had speed, power, and reflexes beyond anything human. They struck without warning, their weapons humming with energy. Ethan barely dodged a plasma spear aimed at his chest, rolling to the side before launching himself forward in a counterattack. His fists connected with nothing but air. A mistake. The next second, a warrior swept his legs out from under him. Before he could react, her knee was on his chest, pressing down hard. He gasped, struggling. The crowd of warriors watching laughed. Sithara stood at the edge of the training ground, arms crossed, unimpressed. You are slow, weak, still thinking like a prey animal. Ethan clenched his fists. Damn it. He was trying. But how was he supposed to fight opponents who had been bred for war? Sithara stepped forward and crouched beside him, her glowing eyes piercing. You have intelligence, but intelligence alone is not enough. Show me, do you have willpower? She stood and nodded to one of the warriors. Again, Ethan groaned and got to his feet. His body ached, but he refused to quit. Because that was what they wanted, to see him break. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. The first ally. After hours of brutal training, Ethan collapsed onto a stone bench in the empty barracks. His arms trembled from exhaustion. His legs felt like they would give out at any moment. But he was still alive. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. How much longer could he last? A voice interrupted his thoughts. You fight like an animal, but you learn like a warrior. Ethan's eyes snapped open. A female figure stood in the shadows. She was different from the others. Unlike the heavily armored warriors, she wore a sleek, dark bodysuit lined with glowing patterns. A belt at her waist carried various tools instead of weapons. Her piercing green eyes studied him, filled with something he hadn't seen much of on this planet. Curiosity. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, forcing himself to sit up. The woman stepped closer, tilting her head. "I am Villara, scientist, strategist, and unlike these mindless soldiers, I do not see you as weak." Ethan narrowed his eyes. Could he trust her? Villara smirked, as if reading his thoughts. "Do not mistake me for an ally, human. I simply find you interesting." She pulled a small device from her belt and tossed it to him. Ethan caught it and stared. It was smooth, metallic, and pulsed with energy. "What is this?" Villara leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "A test. Use it wisely." Before Ethan could ask more, she turned and walked away, vanishing into the shadows. Ethan looked down at the device in his hand. A test. For what? And more importantly, why was she helping him? The hidden truth. The next day, Ethan was called before the Queen again. The throne room was massive, with towering columns and holographic projections of ancient battles playing on the walls. The Queen sat on her throne, her expression unreadable. Cythera stood beside her, watching Ethan closely. The Queen's voice was calm but powerful. "You are a curiosity, human, but I do not tolerate mysteries in my kingdom." She stepped forward, her red eyes locked onto his. "So tell me, why are you different?" Ethan took a breath. He had no idea. But before he could answer, Villara appeared from the shadows. "Because, my queen, he is something we have not seen in generations." The room fell silent. The Queen turned to Villara, her expression darkening. "Explain." Villara stepped forward and held up a small holographic display. It showed something Ethan didn't fully understand. DNA sequences, genetic markers, strange glowing strands of code. "His biology is different from the males of this world," Villara said. "Stronger, faster, more adaptable." Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell was she saying? Villara turned to him. "You are not supposed to exist." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Impossible." Villara shook her head. "Not impossible. Forgotten." She pointed to the holographic display. "Long ago, males of this world were not weak. They were warriors, strategists, leaders. But something changed. Something was done to them." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Villara continued. "The rulers of this world, your ancestors, my queen, engineered the males to be lesser, to be obedient, to be weak." The Queen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan took a step forward, his mind racing. "You're saying they were controlled?" Villara nodded. "Yes. And you, human, are proof that the past is not gone." War begins. Ethan's first mission. Ethan Carter stood in the cold metallic halls of the alien stronghold, his mind still racing from the revelation. Males of this world were once warriors, but someone changed them. Someone made them weak. And now he was here. An outsider, a human, proof that the past had been altered. Villara's words haunted him. "You are not supposed to exist." But before Ethan could fully grasp what that meant, the world around him exploded into chaos. The sky burns. A deafening alarm shook the walls. Blue warning lights flashed as deep, mechanical voices echoed through the fortress. Cythera was already moving, barking orders to her soldiers. Ethan turned to Villara, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. "What's happening?" he asked. Villara's expression was grim. "They found us." Before Ethan could ask who, the sky outside erupted in flames. The walls trembled as something massive descended from the clouds, a warship, dark and insect-like, its hull covered in jagged spikes. Then the attack began. From the ship's underbelly, swarms of enemy creatures poured out. Their bodies were sleek, covered in black kitten-like armor. Multiple eyes glowed red, and their elongated limbs ended in razor-sharp claws. They didn't just land. They tore through the sky. Wings buzzed like locusts as they swooped down upon the city, their screeches mixing with the sound of energy blasts and battle cries. Ethan had seen war before, but not like this. Thrown into battle. Cythera grabbed a weapon from the wall and turned to Ethan. "You wanted to prove yourself, human. Now is your chance." She tossed him a strange device. It looked like a gun, but its barrel pulsed with glowing energy. Ethan caught it and stared. "You expect me to fight?" Cythera smirked. "If you don't, you'll die." She turned and leaped into the fray, cutting through the insect-like creatures with deadly precision. Ethan's fingers tightened around the weapon. He didn't have a choice. He sprinted into the chaos. The city was a war zone. The once proud streets were now burning rubble. Buildings collapsed as enemy forces swarmed through, cutting down anything in their path. The alien warriors fought fiercely, their energy blades carving through the invaders, but for every enemy they killed, two more took its place. Ethan ducked behind a ruined column as an enemy screeched past him. He raised his new weapon and pulled the trigger. A bright blue blast shot forward, hitting one of the creatures in the chest. The alien shrieked, its body disintegrating into ash. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Okay, that works." But before he could celebrate, another creature lunged at him from the side. Ethan barely dodged as claws tore through the air, missing his face by inches. He rolled to the side and fired again. The blast hit the creature's leg, but it kept coming. Too fast, too strong. The creature pounced. Ethan braced for impact. Then boom. A massive explosion ripped through the street, sending debris flying. Ethan shielded his face as fire erupted around him. He turned and saw Velara standing atop a fallen column, holding a strange glowing sphere. She tossed it in the air, and it exploded in a shockwave, vaporizing the surrounding enemies. Velara looked down at Ethan. "Try not to die, human." Ethan grinned despite himself. No promises. The enemy queen's message. Despite their resistance, the battle was turning against them. The enemy forces kept coming, their ships blocking out the sky. The warriors fought valiantly, but they were being overwhelmed. Then, a voice echoed across the battlefield. Deep, cold, mocking. "Surrender your city, your warriors, your throne." Ethan looked up. A holographic figure appeared in the sky, a towering female form, her features sharp, her insect-like armor glistening under the red light of destruction. The queen of the invaders, her glowing violet eyes locked onto the battlefield. "The old ways are dead. You are weak. And we are inevitable." The alien warriors snarled in defiance. But the truth was clear. They were losing. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, not like this. He turned to Cythera and Velara. There has to be a way to stop this. Velara looked at him, her eyes narrowing. There might be. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small glowing device. Ethan frowned. "What is that?" Velara hesitated before answering. "A way to end this war. The impossible mission." Cythera listened, then nodded. "If we can get inside the enemy mothership, we can overload its core. Destroy it from the inside." Ethan blinked. "You want us to board an alien warship? In the middle of a battle?" Cythera smirked. "You're catching on." Velara added, "We won't get another chance. If they take the city, there will be nothing left to fight for." Ethan exhaled. This was crazy. But he had been in impossible situations before, and somehow he was still alive. He looked at the burning city, at the warriors fighting, refusing to surrender. Then he looked back at Velara and Cythera. All right. He tightened his grip on his weapon. "Let's do it." Cythera grinned. "Then try to keep up, human. The final battle and the truth about males." Ethan Carter tightened his grip on the alien weapon as he stood at the edge of the battlefield. The city was in flames. Smoke and ash filled the air. The once mighty alien fortress now crumbled under the assault of the insect-like invaders. The alien warriors, once proud, once unbreakable, were falling back, their lines breaking. They had never lost before. But today, they were losing everything. And Ethan was about to risk his life to stop it. He, a human, had been thrown into an alien war. He had survived battles. He had proven himself. But this was different. Cythera stood beside him, her golden armor scarred with battle damage, her energy blade humming as she prepared for what came next. Vilara adjusted her wrist device, the holographic interface flickering. "The enemy mothership is above us," she said, eyes focused. "If we don't destroy it now, there will be nothing left." Ethan exhaled slowly. This was their last chance. And the only way to win was to board the enemy mothership and destroy it from within. "Let's move," he said. The final mission had begun. The infiltration. Ethan sprinted through the war-torn city, dodging falling debris as the invaders continued their assault. Above him, the enemy mothership loomed like a dark moon, its jagged spires glowing with energy. Cythera led the way, cutting down 2 enemy warriors with swift, deadly strikes. Her movements were like poetry, perfect, precise, lethal. Vilara, using her advanced technology, activated a disruptor device, jamming the enemy's scanners for just a few seconds. That was all the time they needed. Near the ruins of a collapsed tower, they found what they were looking for, a crashed enemy transport ship. Vilara wasted no time. She climbed inside and powered up the systems. The alien technology responded to her touch, lights flickering to life. Ethan and Cythera climbed aboard. "This is insane," Ethan muttered. Cythera smirked. "No, this is war." The engines roared, and the transport ship lifted off, heading straight toward the enemy mothership. The real fight was about to begin. Inside the enemy hive, the transport ship latched onto the mothership's docking bay. Ethan felt the cold rush of fear as the hatch hissed open, revealing the dimly lit corridors of the enemy vessel. The walls pulsed with organic energy, as if the ship itself was alive. A thick mist clung to the floor. The air smelled of metal and decay. Cythera drew her weapon. Vilara activated her scanner. "We have to reach the core," Vilara whispered. "It's the only way to destroy this thing." Ethan nodded. "Then let's move." They sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps muffled by the eerie silence. Then, a screech. Ethan barely had time to react before a massive, insect-like warrior dropped from the ceiling, its claws flashing toward him. He rolled to the side, firing his weapon. The blast hit the creature's head, burning through its exoskeleton. More enemies emerged from the shadows. Cythera charged into the fight, her blade cutting through kitten armor like it was nothing. Vilara threw an energy grenade, the explosion ripping through the hallway. The battle inside the ship had begun. The core and the truth. Fighting through endless waves of enemies, the trio finally reached the core chamber. A massive glowing structure pulsed in the center of the room, the heart of the mothership. Vilara rushed forward, placing a series of explosive devices along its surface. Ethan kept watch, his weapon ready. Something felt off. Then, a deep, echoing voice filled the chamber. "You have come far, little warrior." Ethan turned and froze. From the shadows, the enemy queen stepped forward. Her tall, armored form shimmered with violet energy. Her many eyes locked onto Ethan. "The humans were always a mistake," she said, voice smooth as silk. "You were not meant to return." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What did she mean? The queen's gaze flicked to Cythera and Vilara. "You fight to protect an empire built on lies. You still do not know the truth about your own history." She turned to Ethan, a knowing smirk on her face. "Ask yourself, human, why are you stronger than the males of this world?" Ethan clenched his jaw. He had asked himself that many times. The queen stepped closer. Because you were never meant to be weak. Just like them. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Ethan looked at Velara. She had discovered something about his DNA, about the past. Cythera's fists tightened. Lies. The queen chuckled. Are they? She raised a hand, and a holographic projection appeared, a vision of the past. Ethan's eyes widened. The males of this world had once been warriors. They had fought alongside the females. They had been equals. But then, a great war. And after that, a choice. The rulers of the past, fearing rebellion, had engineered the males to be weaker, obedient, submissive. They had stolen their strength, their history. They erased your people's past, the queen said. And you, human, are proof that it was a mistake. Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift. He wasn't just different. He was a reminder of the past they had tried to erase. Velara whispered, her voice hollow. It's true. Cythera's expression darkened. The truth was like a dagger in her heart. But they had no time. Velara set the final charge. The queen lunged, but Cythera intercepted her. The two warriors clashed, their blades sparking. Ethan grabbed Velara's wrist. We have to go. Now. The countdown had begun. 5 minutes until detonation. Escape and destruction. The trio sprinted through the corridors, fighting through enemy forces as alarms blared. They reached the docking bay, hijacked an enemy ship, and launched into space just as the mothership exploded behind them. The blast lit up the sky, a shockwave tearing through the battlefield below. The enemy forces fell into chaos. The battle was over. Ethan slumped into his seat, exhausted. But his mind was racing. The war wasn't just about this invasion. It was about the truth that had been hidden for centuries. The males of this world had once been warriors, and now they could be again. Victory and a new future. The sky burned. The once mighty enemy mothership tore apart, consumed by fire and debris as the final explosion shattered its core. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, knocking enemy soldiers off their feet, sending their war machines spiraling out of control. The invaders, so confident, so powerful, were now running. The battlefield fell into silence. Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit of the stolen transport ship, breathing heavily. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him. They had done it. They had destroyed the mothership. The battle was won. But as Ethan looked down at the ruined city, at the alien warriors standing amidst the wreckage, he knew one thing for certain. The war was far from over. The cost of victory. Ethan, Cythera, and Velara landed their ship at the city's remains. The once great fortress, built from dark metal and energy, now smoked with the scars of battle. The alien warriors, exhausted, wounded, yet still standing, watched as the last of the enemy forces retreated into the sky, broken and defeated. Ethan stepped out of the ship, his boots hitting the scorched ground. Around him, warriors whispered, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Cythera turned to him, blood still staining her golden armor. You fought well, human. Velara smirked, despite the exhaustion in her voice. And you survived. That's the real miracle. Ethan didn't respond. His eyes traveled across the battlefield, taking in the devastation. So many had died. Warriors, soldiers, innocents caught in the crossfire. And yet, even in the face of so much destruction, they had won. But what now? The war had revealed a greater truth, one that could no longer be ignored. The males of this world were never meant to be weak. They had been warriors, leaders, equals. But that history had been stolen from them. And now that Ethan had proven it was possible to be strong again, would the rulers of this world allow that truth to exist? A tense confrontation. Ethan and his team were summoned to the Queen's chamber. The towering throne room was damaged from the battle. The once polished floors cracked and scorched. The banners of the ruling empire still hung from the walls, but they no longer looked untouchable. The queen sat on her throne, her crimson eyes locked onto Ethan. The silence was heavy. Finally, she spoke. "You have done what no one else has." Ethan waited. "You have proven that the past was not a myth." Her fingers tightened on the armrest of her throne. "You have shown that men were once warriors, that they can be again." Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's the truth. And you know it." Vilara stepped forward, holding up the stolen data from the enemy ship. "We have proof," she said. "You can't hide this anymore." The queen's expression darkened. Cythera stood beside Ethan, silent, her gaze flickering between them. She had once believed her people's strength was absolute, that their way was the only way. But now, after everything they had seen, even she had begun to question. The queen slowly stood. "What would you have me do, human?" she asked. "Change the way our world has lived for generations. Break the system that has kept us strong." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Yes." The tension in the room crackled like electricity. "The truth is out now," Ethan continued. "You can either accept it or fight against it. But change is coming, whether you like it or not." For the first time, the queen looked uncertain. "A choice that will shape the future." The queen exhaled slowly. Then she turned to Cythera. "And you? What do you believe?" Cythera hesitated. For so long, she had believed that strength belonged only to the female warriors, that males were weak, incapable, useless. But Ethan had proven otherwise. She had seen it with her own eyes. She took a breath. "I believe we must be strong enough to change." A murmur rippled through the gathered warriors. The queen's gaze hardened, but she was not blind. She had seen what Ethan had done. She had seen how he fought, how he adapted, how he survived. And most importantly, she had seen how the enemy had feared him. He was not weak. None of them were. Finally, she spoke. "Then so be it." She turned to the gathered warriors. "The truth cannot be erased. The past cannot be undone. From this day forward, strength will no longer be decided by gender, but by ability." A stunned silence followed. The old ways were breaking. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had won. But in a way, the real fight was just beginning. A new beginning. Weeks passed. The city began to rebuild. The enemy forces were gone, but the scars of war remained. For the first time in generations, males were allowed to train alongside the warriors. It wasn't easy. Many resisted the change. Many still believed in the old ways. But for every warrior who doubted, another stepped forward to embrace the future. Ethan watched as young males, once seen as weak, took up weapons for the first time. He saw them learn, adapt, grow. They were not warriors yet, but they would be. Vilara approached him one evening, the sunset casting a golden glow over the city. "You changed everything, human." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, I have a habit of doing that." She studied him for a moment. "And now, what will you do?" Ethan exhaled, looking up at the stars. He had come to this world as a prisoner. Now he was something else. A warrior, a survivor, a leader, and maybe, just maybe, a legend. He turned to Vilara, a grin tugging at his lips. "I think I'll stick around. Because this story, it wasn't over yet. A shadow in the darkness. Far beyond the burning skies of the battlefield, something stirred. Deep in the void of space, a massive black warship drifted silently. Inside, a figure watched the events unfold from a dark throne. A figure far more dangerous than the queen they had just defeated. So, the humans have returned. A slow, cruel smile. How interesting. The screen before them flickered, displaying an image of Ethan Carter. The next war was already coming.